Oh no.
Well, I think I want to. So we were just talking about last week's episode, which, because we're always continuing the conversation, we actually have been on the entire week. 168 hours later, we're coming back, and we were talking about not overwhelming the players by saying, oh, by the way, you want to be the science officer, read this huge book. But I do want to say that what I will do to tantalize my players is that, especially the new ones, after they play a game, I'll open up to a chapter of the book and be like, hey, by the way, there's a little bit here. And they're all of a sudden interested about it. I'll let them borrow and take a book home, and then they come back and it's all, I say, use Post-it notes, whatever you want to make notes on it. So I do want to say, I don't overwhelm my new players by throwing the whole book, like read the core rule book. Never. I inch them into it until all of a sudden you find out that they're borrowing or buying their own books, which is, of course, what we love to see. And this is Continuing Conversations. I'm Michael Dismuke, freelance writer for Star Trek Adventures and also a blogger on Continuing Missions, which is the #1 fan site for RPG. Jim Johnson, why don't you go ahead and get started, introduce everyone and our topic for the day.
Sure thing, Michael. Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Hi, everybody. I am Jim Johnson. I'm the project manager and line editor for the Star Trek Adventures RPG, published by Modiphius Entertainment, and co-host on this here show with Michael, lo these many moons now. And I am super excited to be talking about the engineering role tonight, all about the chief engineer, whatever. I mean, whether you're the chief engineer or a engineer, whatever. You don't have to be the chief if you don't want to be, depending on what character or what kind of campaign you're playing. But super excited to talk about it with this cast of all-stars here tonight. So I will go around the screen as I usually do, have them introduce themselves and maybe provide like a cool, interesting factoid about an engineer, whether they played an engineer or know somebody who played an engineer or something like that. So I'll turn it over to Al.
How's it going? Al Spader. I'm freelance writer for Star Trek Adventures. The engineering role is pretty special to me. My father is a nuclear engineer. So I've got all sorts of stories from him on the submarine to running a power plant and things like that. So you get to see actually a lot of that on some of the sets, especially on Enterprise. It's really cool to see.
Sorry, I put myself on mute. Thank you, Al. Appreciate that. Jeff, introduce yourself.
My name is Jeff Harvey. I am a content creator and host of podcasts and things like that. I think my favorite thing about engineering, so my father was also a mechanic. I come from a whole line of mechanics. My dad was an aircraft electrician and maintenance engineer. And that was something that really, I spent my whole life around the aerospace industry, essentially. And then my roommate, who moved out about a year ago now, is actually a NASA engineer. So I love engineering.
Interesting. And Aaron?
I'm Aaron Pollyea. I'm a freelance writer for Star Trek Adventures. I do the starship, science, technology. So you've seen my stuff. But engineering, boy, I guess I have a lot of it in my family. My family's always been into aircraft. So I've always been around building aircraft engines, going all the way back to my grandfather, who was a radio technician and aircraft technician in the Army Air Corps during World War II. So lots of little technical bits that I kind of grew up alongside, including vacuum tubes and Nixie tubes, all those old school stuff.
Yeah. Wow, that's interesting. Boy, I tell you, add this to the, I guess, Michael, I mean, not to bring the corporate world into this, but we need like a parking lot of stuff, because now I'm thinking we could at some point think about like a Continuing Conversations trivia game or something, because my father was an electrical engineer. He was in the Navy and in the Coast Guard, and like he spent his entire life around circuits and radars and designing stuff like that. And it's fascinating to hear that there's all kind of a common thread around so many of us with our backgrounds of having engineers or engineering or something. I guess it gives you a sense of like how prevalent it was in the 40s and 50s, right? Clearly,
Well, it goes even back further than that. If I may be a geek for a moment and take us back to the 16th century, I believe. So in the 16th century, the people who built castles were called, and there's some Latin word or something like ingenuists or something. And from that term of ingenuity is where the term engineer came from. So engineering as a term goes, of course, we know engineering has been since the early part of human history, no matter what they called it, pyramid building or fire stacking. I don't know. But that term engineering does come from the 15th, 16th century about castle building. So it's quite an interesting geek fact, I know.
Nice. And literally, I'm listening to you, Michael, and I just lost the word. There's a word. It's not semantics. It's not morphology. It's the history of how words came to be. It's
etymology.
Etymology. Thank you. I knew
exactly.
Thank you, Michael, for dropping that etymology on us. So last week we talked all about science, and the weeks prior to that we talked about XOs and captains and doctors. So now the next role in the queue for us to talk about is the engineer. So in my history, I mentioned it last week, like science was always a very popular, very busy character on my shows that I've run in the past. Engineer was easily tied for second place or tied for first place or whatever. And the science officer and the engineer were super tight, episode after episode, session after session. I don't know what your collective experiences have been. I'd love to hear about it. But let's riff on all the coolness that could be had as a engineer. Who wants to jump in?
I can jump in right away. Science is theory. Engineering is putting it into practice. Like, you can have your science officer come up with a crazy idea, but it's going to be the engineer that builds the crazy device that does it, most likely. And they're the ones that are probably going to tell you, no, it's going to take me 3 days, and then do it in one.
Yeah, my thing is, in continuing missions, I had created a small series called the Problem Series. Well, I called it Scotty's Tech Manual. And what it was is I listed, just from my memory, believe me, there's way more problems that could happen, but all the engines, structural, sensor, computer, and communication problems that can go wrong. So I looked at all the systems, how Star Trek Adventures builds it out. And I was like, oh my goodness, the engineer should always have something to do, because all you need to do is break something and they got something to take care of. So engineers on a ship, of course, are where I think you get a chance to get your hands dirty and feel the ship. Their characters are going to be the ones having their hands in the innards of the ship, and they're most likely in some form or fashion metaphysically married to the ship. So engineers can be a very passionate character in a different way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think.
And interestingly,
some of the most like.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Jeff. No, go ahead, Jeff.
Most iconic characters from Star Trek are usually the engineer too. You've got your captain is obviously one everyone talks about, but your number two is usually your engineer. It's who's your favorite engineer? Is it Geordi? Is it Scotty? Is it O'Brien? It's O'Brien. I think it's a very important role to have on the ship, and I think I said the science officer is probably the easiest character to play. I would say the engineer is probably the second easiest character to play as far as having things to do and being able to be engaged.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think engineering in general is interesting because you can almost go like two paths, right? You can be your engineering officer who's in, managing the power flow and all of that type of stuff, and you can even take your engineering degree and focus more on the operation sides of things, right? And go, looking at computers and the software and all that type of stuff. So engineering as a whole, I think, is a very broad category of things that you could do, but specifically, your chief engineer is typically someone who is going to be working around that warp core and making sure, the plasma manifolds are all working in order and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Although I will say it doesn't have to be that, right? And I just want to make sure that not that we're not going to emphasize that, but I think Star Trek Discovery has shown that you can have an engineer who has nothing to do with the warp drive. Or not specifically the warp drive. Like Stamets has a different kind of different propulsion system that he's responsible for. But the neat thing about Discovery is that it's the only Star Trek show where we've never seen the engine room. We still have not seen the engine room after 4 seasons now, which is fascinating to me because I'm so used to seeing it on Star Trek, right? But we haven't seen the traditional warp core. Like obviously they have the spore drive, but they also have a regular warp core. We just haven't seen it yet. And no one's actually been named on that show as the chief engineer, right? Stamets is a scientist primarily, but also has an engineering background. And of course, Tilly's got her engineering and science backgrounds, and Burnham does too. But like, there's not an actual Scotty, Geordi kind of character on that show, which I think is fascinating. Except maybe Reno, right? Reno's probably more of a engineer than anybody else, but we still haven't seen the warp core, and I'm not confident we're going to, because at this point, why would they?
Well, I want to, along your lines, I want to expand people's thinking about what the engineer can be. You don't have to have a starring chief engineer. I think a lot of us do, but I think about all the engineers who are doing like mining operations and colony infrastructure and resource extraction and asteroid movement, and maybe there's someone who's a deflector system specialist or a tractor beam specialist. I mean, there's so many different types of engineers and specialties that I know, because they said it, the people who are going to be playing Star Trek Perseverance streampunks, they're going to be focusing their game on the Mars colony, and they're not going to be in a ship. And so they're going to be coming up. I know they're developing some very interesting characters and some obscure type of engineers. So there's a lot of flexibility.
Building the terraforming equipment that's on Mars. I mean, those engineers are going to be terraforming engineers. You're going to have.
Why not molecular engineers and quantum level engineers, right? There's absolutely so many different medical engineers too, who's building the medical equipment. So
true. Yeah, I always thought, in my gigantic backlog of characters that I want to play someday on a campaign that I'll never get to, wouldn't it be fun to play a theoretical engineer, like a theoretical or a chief engineer who's a theoretical engineer who like has no interest in the nuts and bolts of managing the warp core or fixing the ship, but it's just like all about the big ideas, And I think a little bit about the Kofuari that Scott Pearson made up for the Shackleton book, where like it's this species of little animal-like people, and they're super smart about the theoretical science and the theoretical engineering, and they're like, oh, we could build this incredible, fascinating machine, and we're just not going to because we don't want to. But isn't it so fun to just sit back and think about it? And it's like, oh, wouldn't that be a fun chief engineer where like you're pawning off all the grunt work to your chief, to your second, and you're like spouting off these big ideas on the bridge, and like the captain are like, no, well, that's great, but I really need you to fix the warp core so that we don't get blown up.
Well, a chief engineer should be a little bit like that, in that they're the ones that are kind of maintaining the different work teams that that actually have the specialists. Hey, they might have their own specialty in theoretical engineering, or computer technology. Hey, they're a computer engineer, but they're the chief engineer. They need somebody that's a specialist in the warp core. So they have their warp core team, their impulse drive team, so that fix the fusion reactors. You have your life support tech team, that kind of thing. And as long as they have the team management skills, so to speak, they might be a very effective chief engineer anyway, even without being able to directly fix the warp core or the go nowhere, does nothing conduits, the GMDN conduits.
It goes back to what we were talking last week. If all of you didn't tune in, about scientists, is they run the engineering departments. So again, on away missions or when a problem comes up, who's the best person to handle it? I think about in TNG how Barclay was really the holo programming engineer. So if something happened with the holodeck, he was a little addicted to it, so probably, which is why he leaned toward it. But he was the person who did it. Or O'Brien, transporters and Cardassian replicator specialist. It was there's it's fun actually to have these specialties because it really can round out your character.
Sure, there's characters in the series too. You've got Bruce Maddox, who is obviously an artificial intelligence engineer. You've got Sung, same thing, and there's. You talk about other types of engineers you can have. The ops officer is usually rolled into engineering, and in the first season of Next Gen, there really wasn't a chief engineer. You saw an engineer, but you saw several different engineers in the first season of TNG. So the ops officer kind of became the more of the catch-all engineer, which I think is a thing that is a fascinating way to think about playing an engineer.
And then I just want to add on from the operations manual, there's one other type of engineer that doesn't get played a lot, again, falling under the operations division, but I actually would love to play one, and that's a quartermaster. I know I played as an NPC, but the quartermaster, think about everything they see on the ship and all the conversations they have and what kind of skills they need, like hosting alien delegations, or even adapting quarters to the needs of different alien species. That's a show in itself. So the quartermaster is something I would hope people don't overlook too much.
Yeah, not to mention, like when the senior staff calls down and says, "Hey, we're going to go down to this planet. We need you to create some costumes for us for X, Y, and Z sort of thing." And the quartermaster's like, "Again, like week after week, I'm getting these requests. Like how? I mean, like, and I'm especially thinking of like Enterprise and the original series, right, where they didn't have replicators, right? They had to like either just fashion it out of whole cloth, or like go to everybody's quarters and go into their closets and like, what do we have on hand that we can kind of like cobble together?"
There's going to be somebody on board that's a tailor that's wearing red and is in the engineering department. Like that's all they do is sew, and they have like a singer sewing machine, so to speak. It might be a 23rd century one, but.
And then to go meta just for a moment, and let me indulge my theater background. like those kind of ships are going to have an awesome theater program, because they're going to have this wardrobe. They're going to have this wardrobe division that is just going to be stacked full of stuff. Oh, these are the costumes we wore on that away team mission to planet XYZ, and then we just reuse them or whatever. But there's just ways you can connect that to subplots and focuses.
And somebody finds the hockey pads and uses them as body armor.
Yeah. Well, hey, they did that. The Ambo Jitsu, right? Wasn't that hockey armor?
Yeah, they did it. The guards in Star Trek 2 or 3 also are wearing body armor.
Dudes, yeah,
the security guys. Yeah,
just new coat of paint, something different. Yep.
Something I see underused, and I'm going to just and so no slight to my players who are watching this, but something I see underused with engineering characters, and so I would invite people who select engineering characters to kind of dive into it and see the power of it, and that was a pun intended, is the use of power on a ship during a game. There's some really interesting mechanics that are so overlooked that Nathan Dowdell had written into the game about the use of power, and it comes up in different things, but the two things I don't see happen is taking away from other systems to boost other systems, and also taking the risk of increased complications by spending power to go over the limit of certain things. And there's been times where I'm sitting there as a game master, like, you're not actually limited. If you just do what engineers do on every Star Trek show, take away from comms, take away from life support, take away from transporters, and boost your other stuff. Yeah, it's going to be a risk, and we're going to have some EPS conduits burn out, but you could actually push through this. So as engineering officers, try to learn the use of power. What do you all think about that?
I think it's a great idea. It eats at a pet peeve of mine that I've had for years now that we've never really talked about it because it never came up. But I wish that there was a way that either we had or could like come up with some sort of way to visualize that physically, right? Like I know there's been some fans who've done a great job, and I've seen some of their layouts and stuff. But like, how could we set up a thing in such a way that you could see the different sections of the ship and the different power levels, and then you could actually move power around, right? Almost like a game kind of thing. And I think that would help some engineers so much if they could just visualize it instead of just reading it out. Go ahead, Jeff.
To be off Star Trek Adventures for just a second, there was an older version of the game that had a power conduit, a power allocation system. It was the old, this version here.
It's faster, right? Oh, yeah, even before that, but yeah.
This was the Last Unicorn Games version.
Yeah.
I think FASTA did too, but that was the version that I originally started with. And what we did is we created this thing, and we used little power gems, like they're little flat beads that you put in a aquarium beads, and we moved those all around the board, and it was a lot of fun. And we tried to find, I was hoping that we would see something like that in this version. And I think, to Michael's point, one of the reasons we don't see as many players using it is because it's harder to visualize it in this version of the system. I think it's a really good system. We used it in my last session, and it worked out really well. Like, I really do love the way it's done. But I think players have a harder time visualizing it here because they don't have that movement game. There's a game called Artemis. It's a bridge simulator game. for the computer that has a system that's like that, where you can allocate power back and forth. And I think something like that is a brilliant idea, and I would love to see something like that in a future.
Tony Pie, I may have to send you a bottle of whiskey if you can figure this out. No, not Tony Pie. John the Wind. If John the Wind, who designed our Discord bot, he may be able to figure something out. Either one. Tony invents some cool stuff too.
Yeah, it's tricky because like it's that fine balance point, right? Like, do you want to be a little bit more simulationist and have the ability to move those things around? Or do you want to be more toward the theater of the mind where that doesn't matter so much and you're just making shit up and getting into the narrative and making it happen just because you're saying it, you transfer power from this to this. You don't have to actually visualize the power moving. So I can see both arguments, and I'm willing to bet that Nathan probably wanted to kind of like thread the middle and give everybody some options. We should probably pick his brain about that at some point on a future episode. But it's just a tricky balancing act. Like, what do we want? Yeah. What do you want the game to be like? Do you want to be more hands-on, kind of moving stuff around, or do you want to just kind of like go off the top of your dome and make it up?
And STA seems to definitely be more focused on the more geared towards the theater of the mind design, which I think is great. And it really, like I said, in our last session when we used we used theater of the mind, and it was a really fun session. So I can't say it's a bad way to go about it, but I think it's one of the reasons why it's underutilized.
Go ahead.
Okay. I was going to say that I think in our game, what we tend to do with the transferring of power around is just describe it in narration. We just, hey, it makes sense that we really need to put more power into the warp engines. Well, we're not really spending power from the stat. We're making our roll, and we want to transfer it from shields. Okay, well, that's how we're just explaining it in game. It makes sense in context of the story in the Star Trek universe, but we don't need to transfer anything on the sheet. That's kind of meaningless bookkeeping, so to speak. We're just playing into the tropes of the show by talking about it.
I'm glad you went first there, because I was going to roll off of that and say, what's interesting is, sure, when you're in the heat of battle, keeping track of power and what you have left and regenerating it and all that type of stuff is very, very important. However, if you're trying to promote character interactions, right? Let's say you've got a civilian scientist on board that needs more power to the sensor array, right? Now you've got that type of conversation that has to, take place. Hey, listen, I need power for this. And you as the engineer might know that somebody else needs power for what they're doing on the other end of the ship at that same time. So you have to find a way to manage all of that and make sure everybody has the appropriate amount of power allocated to whatever it is that they're working on. And I think that can really lead to some cool interactions between characters, right?
Yeah, I love breaking stuff. So you all know, like I love throwing complications down, extended tasks, gated challenges, linear challenges, that if something happens or you take a hit or something explodes, these are complicated ships. So normally I'll spend 6 threat to create 3 overlapping complications, or to create a 3-step linear challenge. Or sometimes you give me a lot of threat, I'll take 12. I'll create 6 different problems going on at any given time that your computer screens go out, so you can't even press the buttons. You're gonna have to get under there and dig. So engineers are great characters as long as the game master puts them to work. Make them work so that every time they're in a new situation, pulled into a gravimetric anomaly, skimming an atmosphere on an away team and a phaser breaks, like keep them busy.
And I mean, all you got to do is watch the shows and see just how busy Geordi and O'Brien and Scotty were episode after episode, week in and week out. There was always something breaking, something going wrong, something that had to be fixed. Some last minute desperate gamble had to be done. And I tell you, the stress level in that particular role must be so high. This will actually harken to that conversation we were having last week, inspired by Sam DeLev, about how to get your character involving other characters. Like engineer, if you're like a typical Starfleet engineer, you're probably going to be visiting the counselor more often than not, just to work out that. I mean, it's not PTSD, but like there's so much stress in this particular role. You're going to probably want to have someone to talk to on a regular basis about just how to vent some of that out,
A starship is so complex, and all of its systems are so interlinked that when one thing goes wrong, that one thing can lead to 6 different things going wrong. And each one of those can possibly lead to somebody's death. Very quickly. Space is a harsh, unforgiving environment. And think about, hey, the structural integrity field or the inertial dampeners go down in one section on one deck by 10%. And suddenly when the ship leaves orbit, one crew member is turned to red paste. That's somebody dead because you messed up just a little bit in one tiny part of the ship. So, I mean, an engineer is going to be busy all the time. And yes, granted, stressed out. We see B'Elanna all the time on Voyager, just out of her mind, stressed out.
She'd be stressed out if she was a pastry chef. She's half Klingon.
Well, yeah, but I mean, this is Voyager. They're away from any Federation starbase. They're having to rely on replicated parts and scrounging things, and she's trying to keep everybody alive on that ship.
Yeah.
And yeah, I buy her being stressed out.
Yeah. I do think that
the role changes quite a bit if you go onto a space station. If you're playing a station-based game, I think you become a lot more of an administrator at that point, especially if you are the chief engineer, right? Because you're going to have teams on all ends of that, that starbase, and you might not see them every day. It's literally just you are managing teams and making sure they're going and working on what they're supposed to be working on. And I think that's a very interesting look at the position. If you are, on a starbase.
Yeah, the smaller the ship, the more hands-on your chief engineer is going to have to be. And the larger the ship, the larger the station, the more managerial they're going to have to be.
I want to add. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I was just saying it's important to, when you're creating your character, I think you're coming up with these ideas. You don't have to avoid stereotypes, but I think it's very easy to fall into a stereotypical type of character in engineering where you're the guy who duct takes everything back together, but it just works just barely all the time. Or the engineer that it's the miracle worker kind of thing. There are so many classic tropes for engineers that it's not wrong to lean into those, but you can also kind of look at that and then tweak it just a little bit to make your character slightly more interesting in any of those situations. Like you could have the starbase engineer who is absolutely in love with their station, and like O'Brien kind of was. He's the duct tape guy on DS9, so it's definitely doable. I think it's interesting to be able to look at those tropes and tweak them a little bit just to make your character slightly more interesting without falling into the typical things we normally see.
Yeah. Besides power being, something that I like to see people play with a little bit more because it comes up so often on the show, it's also jury rigging. And I know a long time ago, we had a conversation about that, Jim, about one of your favorite episodes was when somehow Scotty used the phaser to get the shuttle going again. And I know I was inspired to write in the Utopia Planitia book, chapter 5 in optional rules, a whole section about jury rigging, because I think one of the cool things, even though, Jeff talked about the trope of miracle workers, is it does amaze me when someone takes the transporter and turns it into a makeshift warp drive that'll only last 6 seconds, enough to jump them out of the sun. I love stuff like that. So as an engineer, if you're that kind of person, sometimes you have to break away from reality a little bit because it's a science fiction show. When all of a sudden the game master says warp engines are down, life support only has an hour left, and you have no weapons, it's your time to sit back, think about your ship, and be like, well, can I use the deflector as an energy weapon, or can I release the Bassard collector to hide us behind a field of something? You got to really get stupid, launch the escape pods and use them as makeshift torpedoes. I don't know, but the point of the matter is that's where you have to know your ship and just have fun messing with it, which is why I did that jury rigging chapter in Utopia Planitia.
I think the jury rigging thing is an essential part of Star Trek too. I think I didn't want to make it sound like I don't like that portion of it. I absolutely love it. I think most of the times my characters have solved engineering issues in their games, it's been through the radical use of probes to daisy chain, 10 mile or 10 million kilometer things through multiple dimensions. Like it's it's absolutely an essential portion of the game as far as storytelling. It's an amazing thing to do.
Yeah. What
I have
did. She jerry-rigged a life support system, she kept someone's brain alive in a tube or something.
Yeah. Yeah, my players hooked their captain up to his chair. He had cybernetic arm. They hooked him to his chair to keep him alive at one point, and that was fun. So.
Love it. Yeah, I think I think especially I think Next Generation really took a quantum leap toward like how to do weird stuff with the ship that you wouldn't necessarily have thought of, like using the main deflector dish to emit stuff or to absorb stuff, to get the busted ram scoops to emit fog or something, like some sort of energy or something. It was like oh, I never thought of doing something like that, and it makes me think of way back in the early days of the game. I was mostly just a writer, but also doing some editing, and one of the writers had come up with an adventure, and there was a question in there. And at the time, we had Rick Sternbach on kind of retainer for a little while. And I sent him an email with some questions, and he was very polite and answered every question one after another. And then he said, remind your writers to think futuristic, right? Like think bigger and think futuristic, because this is 300 years or 200 years or however many years beyond where we are now. And so like take technology that we have and then just imagine something more. I mean, of course, that's what you should be doing as a science fiction writers, is imagining what's possible next. But that was just a good reminder from the man, right? Like who knows his stuff. And I was just like, oh yeah, think really outside, like way outside the box, like really get not weird, but just like really, really, really different, and like get creative about how these things work and work together.
Yeah, I think one of the best things you can do as playing a chief engineer character is go in, look at a starship systems. You can do it from the core book or whatever book that you have. Just go, okay, how does an impulse drive work? Well, it's a fusion reactor. Well, we kind of know what fusion reactors are. And then it expels exhaust and it pushes the ship forward. Okay, so it's basically a high-tech rocket. I get it. Okay, so since I know how that works, how can my engineer modify it when we need to do something else? It's like the Bassard ram scoops, the fog that you mentioned. They just reversed the tanks, expelled the gas that had been collected from the Bassard ram scoops, and ionized it through the ram scoops magnetic field. So it ionized and glowed. I mean, as long as you know how the Bassards work, right, or like the basic concept behind them, you can kind of go, hey, I can come up with an engineering solution for all of this. This is easy. And you don't really need to know Star Trek. You might just have a slight basis in real life science, engineering, and technology.
I think the Game Master's Guide, which you wrote the sections on, Aaron, have the simplistic explanations of most of the major technologies, if I'm correct. That was I know well received by people. Jeff?
Yeah, for sure. And if you want to go into the weeds a little bit more, like I tell you, the landmark publication for me and my Star Trek role playing back in the day was like 92 when the Next Generation technical manual came out. Rick Sternbach, Michael Kudo collaborated on that thing. It's a soft cover, purple. Yeah, there it is. Mine's too far away to reach. So yep. Like you don't have to memorize them by any stretch of the imagination, but I know my group, every one of us got that purple book and read the hell out of it and memorized everything. And like we knew everything there was to know about the warp drive and the impulse drives and the sensor palettes and all that stuff. And I guarantee all that stuff found its way into the game somehow, because it was just, that book is so rich and the footnotes are fantastic. So like if you're a Star Trek fan, get that book because it's still in print. Like it's been 31 years now. That thing is still in print. So like definitely you'll find a copy, whether it's in a used bookstore or brand new. I encourage you to buy it. Of course, because we want to support our hero writers, but that is a gold mine of information. And as a game master, boy, it's so great, especially when you have an engineer player who is into it, right? It's so great to be able to grab that book and like, I need some random system to break down so they can get involved here. So I can just flip open that book to some random page, boom, hit the finger, pick something. It's like, oh yeah, okay, the tertiary communication system is glitching and it's having an impact on a cascade impact on these other things, and now you get to go fix it.
Yep. No, it's a fantastic book. I can't recommend it more highly. I bought it when it first came out. like the first week that it came out. I think you did too, Jim, right? Like that you saw it come into your bookstore that you were working.
I was actually working at a Walden Books at the time, way back in the day when Walden Books was still in malls. Well, at first Walden Books was still in existence, and there was actually bookstores in the mall. I think at the time, right, because we didn't have the internet. And the only kind of news resource we had was Starlog magazine. Starlog and was it Phantasmagoria, the horror one? Yeah.
Starlog and Omni. I saw things in Omni now and then.
Maybe Omni, yeah. But we had literally, like me and my buddies that were working at the store playing our homebrew Star Trek game, we had literally no idea that book was coming. Like we had seen no advertisements or anything about it. And I was just opening up the boxes from Simon and Schuster that day, and this thing was staring at me from the box. I'm like what is this? It's like the amazing thing. We spent so much time in the back room reading that thing. It was like unreal. So like I think we got 12 copies, and I guarantee we didn't put all 12 out on the floor because there was no way we were going to let those go once we had them.
I remember reading it cover to cover like 4 times right after buying it. Like just yeah.
How long did they even last on the shelf is my wonder.
I mean, in the early 90s, I don't think they lasted very long. I wouldn't imagine.
It didn't last long because, back then, Next Gen was the show to be watching, and it was popular. Like I know all the different Next Gen novels were really popular. Those were hard to keep in stock. And
the Nitpickers guides.
The Nitpickers guides were classic unofficial publications. Those were great too. So yeah. I mean, there's a reason it's still in print after 30 odd years. I mean, that's kind of unreal, but it's a good book, and there's so much great, nerdy technological stuff in it.
Well, really, and I would. Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
Oh no, I was going to add to the same thing. That's actually what I was going to say earlier. Was that book is the book that got me super into the idea of the engineering classes. And actually, there's a website. I think it's a role playing community, but it's Star Trek A Call to Duty. And they actually have a lot of the information from that for different ships like the Nebula, the Akira, the Ambassador, and a bunch of it. And I shamelessly steal a lot of the information. And it's right out of the book. But man, when I'm making my my show Bibles for any show that I do, I have a whole tech manuals for every ship that I do. Like what probes are they have on board, and how many shuttlecraft they have. Like I go through all of it. That book was a big deal for me. And I run a bookstore. I own a bookstore, and we have a copy of that on the shelf right now that came in about 2 weeks ago that I'm waiting to see if somebody picks it up.
So I have to mention just another sidebar, another parking lot item for our future shows. And like the show's never going to end, Michael, because we always find ways to spawn new episodes after each episode. We should consider an episode sometime, and this is getting seriously down into Game Master geekery, about building a show Bible for your campaign. There are pros and cons to that. It is fraught with challenges, especially in the world when you become adults and you suddenly have no time to play. And like how do you manage to schedule a campaign around everything? But building a show Bible is such a fascinating topic. I would love to riff on that sometime with a bunch of different game masters.
It's one of the ones that I think I had suggested earlier, but I got to find my list again because I have a bunch of suggested episodes we can do.
We're going to get to them all. I want to go again, focus on those tech specs, because now that you're all speaking, it's kind of inspiring me, because as an engineer, playing an engineer, I know I love looking at the schematics. Every time I look at the schematic of even the space station, I take my time and I read every single where the line's pointing, and I get mad if I skip it. So I usually try to use something so that I do it in order so I don't miss anything. But if you really are into those schematics, the chief engineer would be a very rewarding role to play.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of different ways that you could take it too, Michael, if you're really into schematics too, right? You could be on the ship. Obviously, that's where we've been focusing a lot here. But, if you want to try some outside the box kind of engineering ideas, what if your campaign takes place on a space dock, right? Or what if you are on a Nebula class ship that has that mobile space dock pod that Aaron put into Utopia Planitia, right? That could... Now you could be like a structural engineer or a designer, things like that. I think that could be really fascinating. And that is just a short hop, skip, and a jump away from, Starfleet Corps of Engineers. right?
Mhm.
You could just double down on that as your whole entire campaign.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
If you need some inspiration from that, go check out the Starfleet Corps of Engineer novella series. There's like 60 something novellas in that series that they published over a long stretch of time, all about the SCE, all about engineers, all about stuff going on. So there is a wealth of material in there that you can tap into as inspiration.
That's what actually inspired the chapter in the Utopia Planitia for me on salvage and retrieval. There's a whole different kind of salvage and retrieval operations where you could just be picking stuff apart and going into strange alien environments trying to figure this stuff out.
The same thing goes to so in the U.S. right now, there's out in the desert, there's a place where all the airplanes are kept that are falling apart. The boneyard, and that's the kind of thing. Like I actually had a character who, not me, one of my players had a character who that was his job. He was the guy who managed the boneyard. He kept certain ships operational, and he scrapped parts out, and that was his whole thing. He was a logistics officer, and I think that was probably the most fun character he's ever played. And there was just a wealth of things we could do with it. We didn't run a campaign that way, but it was 4 or 5 episodes where that was the main focus of the game, and it was a ton of fun.
Yeah, I was going to say, you brought up the boneyard. I was going to say, wouldn't it be interesting to have a chief engineer that had a background during the Dominion War, bringing up the Frankenstein fleet, that they were there patching different systems from different eras that were built by completely different species in the Federation, making them work together. Because, starships back during like the TOS era might have been built fairly differently depending on the space dock. And hey, we're just patching them together as best we can to throw them at the Dominion.
Oh, you have us riffing now. Go forward to Picard, and who was the jerk engineer who thought it was great to put Borg technology into Federation ships? I want to meet that guy so I can punch him in the nose.
That's going to backfire, sir or ma'am.
I know someone said something. Someone said something to them, and they go, "Oh no, I got this all under control."
or the Daystrom engineering the new multitronic computer system. And hey, look, I'm a computer engineer. I invented duotronic computers, which is the next step in computer technology above what we have today in the 21st century. And then he just makes this other quantum leap in computing technology, but it basically breaks a whole bunch of starships, kills a lot of people. And then supposedly the Starfleet doesn't learn and puts a whole bunch of Texas-class starships into service.
When designing my current campaign, Star Trek Europa, one of the things that I wanted to take into consideration was the engineering aspects of what the future of Star Trek was holding post-Dominion War. And with a shortage of officers and things like that, I decided that Maddox has come up with a ship-sized AI that basically handles the majority of the ship. So that's the premise of the ship Europa. It's a data level AI, but it's the scale of the ship, and it does everything. And that's created a lot of interesting. One, you've got a character. The ship is now literally a character. It talks to you. It has its own motivations and things like that. And then you add on top of that the characters interacting with it, and the engineers having to deal with now the ship is literally telling them they're doing it wrong. Don't do that, or anything along those lines. It made the engineer's job a lot more interesting, or not necessarily interesting, but more difficult in a lot of ways. And it's added a lot of opportunities to have other. We talked earlier a little bit about having other character roles get involved. This ship literally is affecting this engineering marvel. Literally interacts with every single department on the ship, and so the engineer has to then interact with every single department on the ship because it's an AI. It doesn't do everything you want it to do. How do you keep it from listening to everything you want to do? How do you? My players have gone back to writing things on paper in game, because they don't want the ship to know everything that they know. So
this sounds like this also needs to be a continuing conversation, because Michael and I can speak at length on this very specific subject of ship-based AI.
Yeah,
our ship became sentient too. Yeah,
Michael, we're never going to stop doing this show. We always find new episodes to talk about. So this is a great conversation. I want to ask everybody one question. This is the same question I asked last week, and then we should probably start moving toward the slow wrap up here, because I know.
Can I just add one thing before you ask that question as wrap up? Because I just want to expand people's minds if they choose an engineer too, to maybe move away from ships and stations and maybe genetic engineering. right? So understand that you could be a genetic engineer on the ship with a clear mission, an expert, maybe you're not even Starfleet, an advisor, but maybe with all this augment stuff that is always constantly plaguing the Star Trek series like Prodigy, even now, genetic engineering could be a really interesting place to go to.
Yeah, good call. So my question for everybody is the same question I asked last time. Imagine, if you will, I'm a brand new player coming into Star Trek and Star Trek Adventures. I don't know really much of anything about engineering or computers or circuitry or any of that stuff. It's all like completely kind of new to me, but I want to be the engineer, or I've been suggested to be the engineer or whatever. What's in it for me? What's the hook? What can I do to be successful?
There's so many things.
Yeah, there are. There are. You can start with any skill that you have in real life that revolves around using your hands in some way, shape, or form. Oh, I'm not an engineer, but I know how to woodwork. Okay, well, maybe you can apply that to a character that's a structural engineer. Go for it. That's a place to start and then branch out. Use that little bit of knowledge. Hey, I know how to work on my car. Well, guess what? You might be able to do a background with a character that understands like shuttle mechanics and rebuilding engines like that, rocket engines, not internal combustion engines, because that would be fairly rare even in the 22nd century with Archer. That would be now and then, but that's just some ideas. Like, take little bits of things from your real life that you do with your hands and go with it. It can be even as strange as cooking, because honestly, that can be applied to, hey, I'm a chemical engineer in the game, and I'm building new chemicals to help the engineering department to help fix the ship, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Go with it.
Yeah, I'll whet people's appetites to something I wrote, a paragraph about why I picked that kind of character. I wrote, Starfleet isn't in the business of only doing safe and easy tasks. Starfleet is always pushing the envelope and testing new waters. Sometimes that envelope pushes back, or those new waters contain reefs that the crew didn't expect. It's in these moments when a starship's systems are failing or have failed that a crew begins to look at new ways to solve a problem before their lives come to an end, patching together systems in ways they were never designed to work as a tradition in Starfleet going back to its founding, and one that players will inevitably take part in. Sometimes a system that barely works is better than none at all.
Tell me what you want to do with it. Like, what would you like to build? Like, we're telling a story. You've found these new adversaries that have a new piece of technology that you would like to check out. That you would like to build on our ship. Tell me that, and then let's figure out how we can tell that as a story over the course of multiple episodes, right? I think that's a really big deal, is let your GM know what you think would be cool to do, and then we will try to find a way to make it work in the story.
I guess from a resources standpoint, there are a lot of resources out there for Star Trek technology. If you wanted to get yourself more up to speed and educated on what Star Trek's technology and engineering kind of things are, there's a ton of various tech manuals. I've got, I don't know, dozens of them spanning from other RPGs on through like Mr. Scott's Guide to the Enterprise and stuff like that. Ship recognition manuals, all kinds of stuff. It's out there. It's easy to get. It's free. And just having, again, a base knowledge, it's not necessary. You can roll with anything in the story, and the GM will help you make it reality. But if you want to get that feel, if you want to make it feel like Star Trek, having that base knowledge, and you might find, like as we said earlier, reading that Star Trek technical manual, you can spend hours just flipping through these books and enjoying them for themselves and watching the show and whatnot. I recommend starting out again with the idea of just kind of rolling with everything, and then as you're playing the character more and more, try to educate yourself on how the character should be in this setting. Like the information's out there. It's not hard to find.
All right, great stuff. All right, cool. Well, let's Michael, how about we get into the gratitude for this week, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yep, sounds good. I'm going to start. We're over a year in 61 episodes. I think this will be our 61st episode. And I'm going to have to go with Studio Timbo, Jeff Harvey. Just so people know, in case I think we've only mentioned the history once, because now he's starting to come into the front of the camera for continuing conversations. This all started actually with Jeff doing STA Engage 2 years ago, going on 3 years ago. And he invited me to do some shows. And then, life happens and it was kind of sporadic. And then Jim, you took up the ball and said, hey, yeah, I'll host. And then we ended up getting it done weekly, but I could never have done it without Jeff and Studio Timbo, because he's the one who does that fantastic opening that you all see if you watch the YouTube video, and the closing and all that. So Jeff, I've been way too late in thanking you for your labor of love in doing this. We literally could not have a good looking show without you. And we literally could not have it on all the podcasts, including where I found it on Spotify the other day, if it wasn't for you, because I just don't know how to do that kind of stuff. So everyone who listens to the show and likes it, be glad, because Jeff is the foundation that makes it happen.
I will say, if you want to find the show in other places too, you can find it on all the major platforms. It's also on Pandora and Amazon. And if you want to find it, it's out there. I have pushed as hard as I can to get this everywhere I can get it. So
awesome. We appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Jeff. Aaron, your gratitude.
I'm grateful for my parents to allow me to have explored Star Trek as much as I did, taking me to a couple conventions when I was a kid, buying me Star Trek novels, like the old TOS, like numbered novels that were done for the episodes, just basically retellings of the episodes. I'm so happy about that. Or taking me to the bookstore that first week to, buy this Star Trek technical manual. I still have the original, because I bought it with my first paycheck from my first job. Believe it or not, it came out that week.
A story.
Yeah, and they said, "Hey, we'll take you out there. That's okay," because it came in that week. So my parents have always been really supportive, and I'm grateful to have them be supportive of something that is not like, this is a science fiction thing, and you wouldn't normally have a lot of parents that would be super supportive of being passionate about something like this, and they are.
Yeah. Awesome. Jeff, gratitude for you.
This might be a little taboo, but I actually I have a lot of gratitude for the guys at Last Unicorn Games, because they're the ones that got me into Star Trek, the role-playing game originally. The guys like Matt Colville, mostly Steve Long. Steve Long, the legendary designer, he did a book that was an engineering book. It was called Space Dock for the original Last Unicorn Games. That was an in-depth, like, piecemeal how to build ships. And I spent months playing around with that system, building ships of various kinds. And I think that really inspired me not only to do engineering types things in game, but just for the Star Trek atmosphere altogether. It got me really into the technology of Star Trek. And that game was to me a watershed role-playing game. And I really have a lot of it's what got me here to this game, which I think is the next evolution of what I really enjoyed from that game. So that's who I gotta have gratitude for.
Super cool. Thank you. Awesome. Yeah. Al, how about yourself?
I'm going to go very specific. I'm going to thank BC Homes for keeping that character generator updated, because I've been on it a lot the last few weeks, and it's just so amazing and so easy to use and so intuitive. Thank you for keeping that going for us.
And I know some people can't see it if they're listening to this and not watching it, but Al wears this shirt that looks like an Elcar's computer pad. And I just got to say, Al, if you ever wear that around me, I'm touching you. I'm touching you, man.
I want to know where to get one.
I know, right?
I think it's on the official fan club, or not the fan club. That goes way back. The official website, I think, has those shirts. Maybe. Al, where did you pick it up?
I can't even remember. Some rabbit hole on Facebook, I'm sure.
Yeah, he's going to be like, Michael, stop touching my back. I'm just poking it.
Maybe he'll humor you and make the sounds like the beeps and the boops and stuff.
please do.
Anyway, so my gratitude. I'll do, of course, gratitude to all the engineers, all the people who were involved in the shows, creating Technobabble and making it sound plausible. Gratitude for the actors who made it sound good, putting all those big words into those big unusual words into their mouths and somehow making it sound believable and authentic in the moment. So thanks to all them to giving us a template, right? As role players, they are to some degree who we emulate. And if nothing else, at least they're in our DNA, because we think about, oh, this is Geordi and this is O'Brien and this is how they sound. And so this is what a Star Trek engineer sounds like. And now we can do that by using the words and stuff. So gratitude to them. I also want to give gratitude to our very own Aaron for creating amazing content for the books all these many years. It's always a treat to read your stuff. You always deliver way early, which is a pro and a con, because it's like I can't get to it right away. But every time I read your stuff, it's like, oh, there's so many great ideas packed into every single paragraph. Every single sentence is like a whole episode in and of itself. And I love reading that stuff. And I'm grateful to have you on the team. So thank you so much for being here and for your your creativity and your ability to like take space frames and just like make really cool stuff out of them and make every single one of them unique and different and not like cookie cutter kind of things. It's so cool to read that stuff. So gratitude to you. And finally, of course, the fans. Again, gratitude to the fans of this game day in and day out. I'm grateful that you are out there playing the game, talking to each other, supporting each other, even converting new players one player at a time. You're running games for new people, and one of them might go buy the book or might go run a game using a quick start. Like, you don't have to buy the book, but you have the quick start. But we're slowly building the fan base, and we're slowly building the visibility of the game. And it's like, that's how you got to do it. And we're 6 years strong now and moving on. So thank you to the fans. We would not be doing it without you, and we can't do it without you at this point. So thank you.
I don't know if you guys can hear that. There you go.
That's awesome.
Thank you, our engineer.
Are you telling me if you come on every show, we'll start getting sound effects?
I have I could do it all.
Evolution. Continuing evolution. Here it
that
comes.
Deserves an my.
We're gonna get the LCARS layout and all that stuff. So
Yep.
All right.
I can do it all live too. So
oh no.
Well, let's. This is where Jeff will slowly start cueing in the amazing music to close us out. So everyone, IDIC.
Live long and prosper. Be safe. Be well. Thank you, everybody. See you next time.